motion is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. Mr John Penrose.
Mr Speaker, this bill would do two things, as we've just heard. Reducing the voting age has been repeatedly discussed and rejected by sizable margins in the Commons in the last 12 months, in multiple stages of both the local government bill and the EU referendum bill, so I won't rehash all the same arguments here. But the proposed bill would also change the voting system too. And while I acknowledge and respect the honourable lady's energetic commitment and zeal about this particular cause, I fear this bill may harm our democracy rather than helping it, which I'm sure is exactly the opposite of what she's intending to achieve. The reason, of course, is that we held a referendum on whether to change our voting system in 2011. And collectively, we voted against change. We decided to keep our tried and trusted first-past-the-post system by a hefty margin of more than 2 to 1. So a proposed bill which claims to be about improving our democracy starts with a proposal to ignore a very clear democratic decision. The people have spoken, and by a majority of more than 6 million, have decided they want none of this. Now, some would argue, Mr Speaker, and in fact the honourable lady did, that the 2011 referendum result shouldn't count, that it asked the wrong question about the alternative vote system, which is not technically a proportional system at all, as we've heard. And if only they could be allowed to rerun the poll with a slightly different question, somehow a completely different result could be achieved. Now, let's ignore for the moment, Mr Speaker,
The concept of giving way in respect of exchanges on 10-minute rule motions, a fact of which the right honourable gentleman, with his long experience, ought to be aware. Mr John Penrose.
Mr Speaker, I'm happy to pick this up in the tea room with the honourable gentleman afterwards, that would help. But let's ignore for the moment, Mr Speaker, the unlikelihood of a 6 million vote majority being overturned by a small change in the question. And just consider for a second the dozens and dozens of different forms of proportional and alternative voting systems, whether it's open lists, zipped lists, the D'Hondt method, supplementary votes or transferable votes. Every different version has its own passionate and committed band of dedicated enthusiasts. Some of them are highly reputable organisations. Others are lonely obsessives blogging furiously in the privacy of their parents' spare bedrooms. But no matter which they are, it is simply not possible to argue that we should ignore the AV referendum result just because it didn't propose precisely their preferred flavour of new voting system. That fundamentally misses the point. Not only did voters reject changing our tried and trusted first-past-the-post system, but they will take a very dim view indeed of the prospect of many further referendums in future, as dozens of other organisations queue up to argue that the last poll didn't propose precisely their particular favourite voting system and to demand yet another rerun with a slightly different question. Even worse, this bill comes at a time when a large proportion of the population is far more concerned about the much more recent EU referendum, where there was a narrower, although still decisive, majority verdict. I am not alone here in getting hundreds of emails from people who don't like the result of the EU vote and are loudly demanding a rerun, a vote in Parliament, a lawsuit, anything in fact, to change the result. By telling people they can ignore the results of the even more decisive AV referendum in 2011, this bill would implicitly encourage people to believe they can ignore the result of the EU referendum too. Telling people, in effect, that if they stick their fingers in their ears and sing Beethoven's Ode to Joy loudly enough, Brexit may not actually mean Brexit at all. Mr Speaker, our democracy is already pretty fragile, with trust in politics and politicians and election turnout already worryingly low. I can't think of anything more calculated to stoke the fires of anti-political anger than acting as if the will of the people, clearly expressed in not just one but two separate referendums on different issues, might not be democratically binding or sovereign after all. So please, Mr Speaker, enough already. This bill ignores the repeatedly expressed democratic will of Parliament, which has already rejected lowering the voting age many times over the last year, and it ignores a thumping referendum verdict against changing the voting system in 2011 as well. We're about to abolish an entire layer of proportionally elected representatives when we get rid of MEPs as we leave the EU. Now is not the time to replace them with something else. The people have spoken, and even though I understand and respect the answer is not to the honourable lady's liking, I'd urge her, please, to respect its democratic power and to leave the issue alone for a long, long time.
Order. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as other opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby! Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 74. The noes to the left, 81.
The ayes to the right, 74. The noes to the left, 81. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. We now come